Good morning, dear friends. Today is Thursday, the 23rd of Sivan, and June 3rd. It's a Thursday. We're learning currently the entire Talmud, one page at a time. Presently, Maseches Shabbos, chapter 5, Perek K, and we are Nun Daled Amud Aleph. That would be 54a. We've been gunning for this page for 2 days, but Baruch Hashem, yesterday we had high quality discussions, covered a few less lines than usual, but here we're at it. We're back at the Gemara, and I'm grateful that you're all here. Before we start, I would just like to make a few important dedications. In addition to our prayer for the healing for all of Klal Yisrael and the names that we have on our list, Mazel Bas Esther, Davna Sultana Malka, I want to give a special
donuts.
And just like that, I was knocked off. So let's get in what we can. We're going to give a special mention to Yeshua Natan ben Shena Toiba. This is a young boy who his family's been on a journey to help find a cure for a very uncommon genetic condition, and they put it. You want to sit, everyone? You want to see fishies? Come. Oh. And with great effort, communal effort, and perseverance by the family, they're at last going to have a procedure today, or maybe they had it already. And
starting right now, 10 o'clock.
And so we're going to dedicate our learning now. I apologize for the choppiness of the internet. The schos is refuah, and we know that although this is experimental and unprecedented, Hashem is the healer, and let this be the refuah for this young man. Let's bring a bracha to his family, and if this indeed turns out to be, Be'ez Hashem, it will be effective, it'll bring relief to many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of other people, primarily Ashkenazic Jews. And so this is an important day, important development, and it's our pleasure and privilege to mention that at the very outset of today's shir. I also am going to mention Yosef and Levi Yitzchak, who's Reb Nachum's father, whose yahrzeit will be tonight. So with that introduction out of the way, or I don't want to get it out of the way, it's very important and worthwhile, let us begin studying Maseches Shabbos chapter 5. And we have the privilege today to be joined in studio with a fine young woman. Her name is Nechama. She has been a guest host more than once with us. It is her job to make us appreciate every...
I'm having trouble hearing you, Rabbi. I don't know if it's only me.
Anyone else having trouble?
No.
All right, so I also, while I get my computer situated, I want to welcome Mark, who is with us.
How you doing, Rabbi?
Good to have you on. Again, I apologize. It's possible that the internet choppiness is my fault. Let's try to get in what we can. If I need to, I'll call in with my phone. If I need to, I'll call in. Mark, do you advise that we do that now?
No. Please keep on doing what you're doing.
All right. When
I hear you, I don't. Does everybody else hear you?
Yes.
Okay, so should we have any?
I hear you, but not clearly.
But Beryl, we have to consider until I get more than one person's feedback, it might be your computer. Although, again, the odds are that today will be a little choppy. Let's get started.
It is choppy, but so far it's understandable.
All right, so then in that case, let me call in right now with my phone. So this
I hear you perfectly.
All right, let me call in with my phone on the left.
I hear you perfectly too.
So do I. So do I. You're here good. You're good.
All right. So I'm on standby. I'm not going to call in. If we have trouble, I'll call in. Let's get started. We've been talking about gear, stuff on an animal that may or may not be used on Shabbos. Why not? Because there are two concerns that have come up. Concern A, it is, and maybe the most important concern, is that it is a burden. Stuff that's not essential for the animal's protection or comfort is a masa, burden that cannot be carried by an animal because it belongs to a Jew. Issue 2, even if it is not a burden, if there is a likelihood that the owner will end up being left with the item in their hands, thus carrying on Shabbat in a public domain, that too is a concern that might make or provide a restriction or create a restriction for carrying the item on Shabbos. That's what we've been discussing. Yesterday, from beginning to end, we had some very interesting and maybe unexpected discussions about virtuous people or potentially virtuous people with miracles or other interesting and thought-provoking episodes. And then we actually gave a series of definitions, which were mostly kinds of treatment for animals that mostly were about birth control or to encourage breeding. And those were items that apparently were considered acceptable for the most part, although we have to go back to the Mishnah and see each one on Shabbos. Today, we're going to continue going through those items. Just to remind you, we left off with an interesting episode. We kind of rushed through it, which was that kivulot meant unproductive, which was a birth control of sorts in the animal world. And we said proof that the word Kabul means that from the story of Hiram, friend of King Solomon, who received the proceeds of certain towns, 22 towns, if I'm not mistaken, and he called it the land of Kabul, which meant not super productive. Along the way, we encountered this very interesting comment or commentary about how these were rich towns, but the lack of productivity was not due to a lack of affluence, but because of the affluence. Because they were comfortable already, they were less motivated to excel and succeed. And I think that's also something that we can understand and maybe relate to. Many times people who work really hard in their careers and their children end up living a more comfortable lifestyle, they'll complain that they struggle to have their children have the same drive as they did because they were born comfortable. And so they don't appreciate that lack of hard work could put them back considerably. And it's one of the challenges that affluence has. Of course, not to deny that poverty also has many challenges, but there you have interesting and fleeting social commentary in the Gemara yesterday. Now, today, we're going to start a new subject, kivunos. Our Mishnah mentions kivunos, that sheep can go out kivunot. What is kivunot? Nobody knows. Well, not nobody knows, but the Gemara needs to ask the question. And here we go. Kivunos. Shemechabnin oisom milas. It is that the clothing, the wool is covered up lemilas to create high grade, high quality wool. Now, wool, typically, if you've ever seen a picture of a sheep running around in the wild, the wool doesn't look like we imagine, white and fluffy. It can get quite knotted and dirty. And one of the processes of preparing wool, indeed, is to be malabe, to whiten it. But it would appear that should one be able to protect the wool from ever becoming, protect the wool from ever becoming dirty, that wool is going to be of greater quality, cleanliness, and white. And especially at a time where I suppose if your garments were made of wool, you wanted to rely on the natural pigment and they weren't necessarily dyeing the wool, that would certainly be an important contribution. And the Mishnah says that a sheep can go out, kivunos, can go out while its wool is covered. How you cover the wool? So Rashi actually says, koishrim beged svivoy b'yom shenoilad. The moment these certain animals are born, they're immediately encloaked in a material shet simroi naki, to keep the wool clean, umishamer simroi shelo yitanef, and it prevents the wool from ever becoming dirty or otherwise contaminated. Mechabnin, what's this word? Al sha'oisim kimin karse matachas lechaber habeged k'may tinasen v'nasi lebesi. Some kind of a fixing of the garment on the wool. And milas, again, is the Hebrew word for a high-grade material, high-grade garments. How do we know that that's really what kivunos means? So we're going to bring an interesting proof from a Mishnah on the subject of tsaras, leprosy. As we know, skin malady that's discussed in the Torah, leprosy, tsaras, we translate it sometimes as leprosy, has different shades of white. And there's a Mishnah that discusses, there's different kinds of whites. There's the se'es, skin malady, which is kitsamer lavan, which is the same shades of white as white wool. My tzemer lavan, what is white wool? Well, here it goes. Amar Rabbi, Amar Abaya, kitsamer naki, ben yoimoy, And we comment that how do you get clean wool? Well, when you do this process, when you cover it with, when you do this mechabdin, when you cover it with another garment, and therefore you have really sparkling white wool. And so there you have another item in the Mishnah that is permitted to go. I imagine the reason why it's permitted to go is that it is for the protection of the animal, and it's strongly attached. So we're not concerned about it falling off, and we're not concerned. It's not considered a masoi because it is to benefit the animal. That's what I'm going to imagine we must say. And it's a very solid attachment. It's practically part of the animal. It's almost like a shell, if you will, because you put it on from the moment that it is born. So I suppose that's what we're going to have to conclude as to why it would be acceptable. Now the Mishnah continues. The ha'izim, the she-goats, yoitzois, sirurois. They can go out with their udders bound. And we've talked already about a few different ways of binding the animal's udders with different kinds of animals. You had sheep and goats and the like. This is going to be our final discussion about the binding of udders, and it's going to relate back to some extent to our earlier discussion. Itmar, we learned, Rav Omar, what's the halacha? Who do we follow? Because, and here's really where we should bounce back to the Mishnah just for the moment. Let's see if the Safari will help us out. No, we're going to have to do this manually. Let me know that you can still see the screen. Sometimes when we change the page. All right, so let's, hold on. Let's just go to the Mishnah. Shabbos. Which chapter are we looking for, folks? Chapter 5 towards, here we go. Just looking back at the very same Mishnah we've been discussing all along. There we go. All right, here's the Mishnah. You might recall this. Yesterday we explained that, and we had 3 different interpretations. So we explained that was to make them available. We said was unavailable. Either the sheep were tied up, the sheep's tails were tied down, or the males were essentially blocking from mounting. Then the Mishnah continues. That's the very line we're quoting. And earlier on in the Mishnah, we already discussed, earlier on in the Gemara, we already discussed about binding of the goats. The reason why we discussed it is because we introduced the Brisa, the Tosefta. The Tosefta went through a whole series of items, including, again, if I'm not mistaken, including the subject. So that's why we discussed it at length. But now is where the Mishnah actually discusses it. So I want to read it inside real fast. Goats, she-goats can go out on Shabbos bound. This would be called opinion A, the Tana Kama. We don't have the name, it's the Tana Kama. It says goats can go outbound. Rabbi Yossi says never, with one small exception, Kivunes, which is what we discussed earlier on. Rabbi Yehuda says it depends. Rabbi Yehuda says that it depends if liyavesh or lechalav. If it's to dry them out, it's just for the well-being of the animal and the welfare of the animal, and it's allowed. But if it's to collect the milk or to facilitate the milk, it's not allowed. So we have 3 opinions in the Mishnah. Opinion A, always permitted. Opinion B, always prohibited. Opinion C, Rabbi Yehuda, it depends. He differentiates between what the purpose and the style of the binding. That's our Mishnah that we've already discussed a little bit, but I want it to be fresh in our mind for now. So again, now our Gemara quotes this line in the Mishnah. We have a question about what to do with goats whose udders are bound, which was prevalent in those days. I don't know if it's prevalent today, but in those days it was. Reb Allen, are you familiar today? You've been our expert in all things farm related. Are you familiar with any kind of binding of udders of animals in 2021?
Never saw that before.
Alan, before you answer, tell him pharmacist is not spelled F-A-R-M.
Oh, I thought that was a pharmacist. You're the
Very funny.
Rebero, your fellow pharmacist has actually proven to be a very, very important and an important resource for our study of this Gemara. Your fellow pharmacist seems to know a little bit about the farm.
Alan, do you have an utter opinion?
I have no other thoughts.
I give up. Utterly no idea. Okay.
Bernie's going to milk it for all it's worth.
You got it.
I give up. All right. Itmar. So what is the halacha? Who of these three opinions do we follow? Rav Omar. Rav says, halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. We follow the position of Rabbi Yehuda. What did Rabbi Yehuda teach us? Let's just bounce right back to our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who said, it depends. Sururas leyavish, good. To dry up the milk, no problem. And for milk, yes, problem. So again, what's the halacha? Rav says to Rabbi Yehuda. He says sometimes it's permissible, sometimes it's not permissible. Shmuel Omar. Shmuel says, is Shmuel going to agree or disagree? How do you know Shmuel is disagreeing? Well, we'll see the opinion in a moment, but even before that, the formula of how it's written. Shmuel Omar, when the Omar comes second, it means it's a retort, it's a disagreement. And Shmuel says, no, halacha Rabbi Yaisi, we must paskin like Rabbi Yaisi. What does Rabbi Yaisi say? He says the sheep can never go out, or the goats can never go out with their udders being bound. So we have a machloikis not only in the Mishnah, but we have a machloikis in the application of the halacha. We have Rav and Shmuel. Rav embracing the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel embracing a more stringent opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Yaisi. For the record, this is not the first time in our parak of Amet Behema that we found Rav to have a more lenient and broad series of permissions or items that are permissible on an animal. What was the other instance that Rav was more lenient than Shmuel? Anyone recall? Spot test? Had to do with
maybe the saddle blanket.
The discussion was when we were talking about the saddle blanket, but more specifically about the feed bag. Rav says the feed bag is okay, and Shmuel says no way. If you may recall that was so. Anyways, here again, Rav more lenient, Shmuel more machmir, more restrictive in regards to the sheep going into the public domain with their udders being utterly bound.
The only thing I don't understand is that when we learned anatomy way back, there was no reabsorption of the milk that goes back into the system or dry up.
We're not talking about the reabsorption of the milk. We're talking about
or even dry up.
We're talking about the possibility of strongly binding the udders of the animal to prevent further development of milk. And probably, I don't know. Again, this is not something that
It says here to dry the milk.
Right. I'm not a pharmacist, so I don't know about animals. But what I do know is that the more an animal has the opportunity, or a person too, I believe the more a person is lactates and suckles, the more their body might produce milk. So perhaps this binding was to try to prevent any kind of production of milk by being bound very tightly. Again, I don't know the exact medical situation, although if you'll wait a moment, I'll open up. Rabbi Steinsaltz's Gemara may have something to add. Let us take a look. Really briefly.
We need a veterinarian here.
We do. You know what? Let's recruit. Who wants to be our recruiter? We do need to recruit a veterinarian, although we probably should have done it at the beginning of this chapter, but it's never too late.
What's the commission?
50%.
All you can drink.
50%. So actually, Alan, you're asking a good question. Give me just a moment, because it could be that your question is this. I don't know if you remember, I mentioned, I think Tosfos and others have different nuanced ways of understanding these two opinions. What does it mean liyabesh, and what does it mean lechalev? One opinion says, or a nuanced difference is maybe it's not about drying the milk or preserving the milk. Maybe it's about what you want to happen to the milk that's actually dripping out. If you're trying to collect the milk, then this has nothing to do with protecting the animal. It's about preserving the owner's milk. Because maybe they had a little collection. Maybe there's a little pocket or baggie to collect the milk. That's a possibility. But I believe it's possible, although I don't have the specifics, that in biology it is possible that there are types of binding that would prevent or over time cause the animal to dry up their milk. But again, I don't really know enough about that to weigh in beyond that. So we'll ask our pharmacists to keep their eyes out. And if you have any thoughts, feel free to
try and research it.
So we're at the end of this Mishnah, and the Gemara is now trying to figure out the halacha. And so we have one record which shows Rav taking one position and Shmuel taking another position. That's not a travesty. That's common. When it comes to Psak halacha, there are a few opinions. You have to choose one. Maybe you for different reasons. Rav has his reason to follow Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel has his reason to follow Rabbi Yossi. But let's see how the Gemara continues. There is another version of how this conversation went. The other version of the conversation does not say the name of the rabbi of the Mishnah. They each explicitly conveyed their halachic position. You want to read it here? Rav expressed the halachic opinion that liyabesh mutar v'loy lechalev. You're allowed to have the animal bound if it's to dry up the milk, or at least not to facilitate the milk, but not lechalev. But if it's there to preserve the milk or collect the milk, that would not be permissible. Shmuel Amar echad zeh ve'echad zeh asur. And Shmuel says no, both scenarios are not permissible on Shabbos. Is there a major nafkamina? Is there anything added in the second edition that's different than the first edition? First, they were quoting the rabbis. Now they're just saying the position straight out. Well, it seems like there may have been some additions of the Mishnah that reversed some of the rabbis' names. So by them clearly saying what their position is, by saying the exact halachic position, it avoids any kind of confusion. This is what Tosfos says. So if you look on the side, just really briefly, Vim Toimar, Leimamar halacha kamar. Why didn't they just say that they're following an earlier halachic precedent? What would be the purpose of re-expressing the idea if it's already been expressed in the Mishnah? There are versions that reverse the opinions, and so it would leave us utterly confused if we did not know the exact specifics of the halachic position, and therefore we have Rav and Shmuel each expressly saying their opinions.
Rabbi,
Yes.
just go back a little bit to that paragraph. Okay. I don't understand this. Rav said if the others were bound to dry the milk supply, it's permitted.
Yes.
And if they were bound to conserve the milk, so if they're bound either to dry it or to conserve it.
No, it seems like, and you're asking a good question, because again, there is some discussion in the commentaries exactly what the definition of the word liyabesh on the challah is. But for the purposes of our discussion, quite simply, there were two techniques for binding the udders with two different objectives. And when it's clear that the objective is to conserve the milk, then it means that you're not binding the animal for its own sake. And in a sense, your animal's just walking around town carrying milk. That's a burden. That's not allowed on Shabbos. But if it's just to help the animal's well-being, because we mentioned yesterday that animals can be weakened when they lactate, they can perhaps be healthier or stronger when they don't. And so therefore, this is to assist the animal's own strength and health and well-being. And therefore, that might be more permissible. It's not considered a burden. And additionally, if it's bound tightly, it's less likely to fall off. So that's another possibility. So I hope that answers the question.
Is the Talmud going to leave us like this, or we're going to come to a conclusion?
What do you mean? Leave us
Is the
like what?
Talmud going to lead the two opinions? So we don't know what to do until we look at the Shulchan Aruch, or is the Talmud going to go into this?
No, the Talmud is going to not tell us, but we're going to learn the Gemara, and then we're going to look at the Shulchan Aruch, and that's how we're going to know what to do. I mean, really, if we had a lot of time on our hands, what we would do is we'd look at some of the earlier halachic opinions. We look at the Rush, who's in the back of your regular Gemara. We look at the Rif. We look at the Rambam, and we'd see how they determine it. And then we would take a look at the Torah. And then we look at the Beit Yosef, and the Beit Yosef would probably give us a nice big recap on all the opinions. And then we look into the way the Beit Yosef brings it in the Shulchan Aruch. And then we'll observe if the Ramah has any further comments. And then we might look into the Shulchan Aruch Harab to see if the Balatanya, the Alter Rebbe, has his angle. And then we could look in the Mishnah Brura and see if the Mishnah Brura brings further light to the subject. So really, that's how a Jew, when we'll start our kollel and we'll do this full time, that's what we're going to do.
No, because it presents a serious thing, because if we have these of conclusions or lack of conclusions, then people could paskin, depends which person you come to with the shaila.
Not really. I'll tell you why, and I don't want to go into it entirely right now, but there are certain rules, certain formula of how to figure out such a debate. So there are a certain genre of halacha that we typically follow Rav, and there's a certain segment of halacha that we follow Shmuel. And so the more you learn the Gemara and the more you're broadly informed, the more you can actually read a Gemara like this and really know what the halacha is to be.
So are we to take from this that at the time that this is written, that some people followed one and other people followed the other?
In the
before
time
we had the Rambam and everything?
In the time the Gemara was written, yes, the students of Rav followed Rav's Psak Halacha, and the students of Shmuel followed Shmuel's Psak Halacha. Absolutely.
Okay, that's it. That was my point. Okay.
And actually, there's a whole in the back of Maseches Brachos. There is a series of, again, I think I might have showed this to you. I might have mentioned it back then. There's a series of what's called Kloli Hashas, rules for the Gemara. Some of them are very elementary, like when I showed you earlier today. It says Rav Amar Rav X, Shmuel Amar. When it says Shmuel Amar, the Amar comes later. You can always just about know it's an argument. Heiku has this halachic implication. There's all different rules. And so one of the rules the Gemara bring is like this. Rav and Shmuel have a machlokes. So we follow Rav when it comes to what's referred to as Isser, the Heter, Kosher, Shabbos. We typically will follow Rav. And when we come to Dinei Mamonot, when we come to financial matters, we typically follow Shmuel. I'm oversimplifying it because that's the general rule. But there are certain scenarios where we're actually going to follow Shmuel and Rav anyways. But just so you know, so generally when you learn the Gemara and you see the machlokes, Rav and Shmuel, you understand that you may have to consider, okay, what type of debate is this? Do we follow Rav? Do we follow Shmuel? And you know what? When we finish this Gemara, we'll right away jump into the Shulchan Aruch, and we'll see if the Shulchan Aruch follows the formula that I just related. So let's finish up. We're almost to a Mishnah, and then we'll jump into the Shulchan Aruch. But Beryl, don't let me forget, please.
I'll put it on the list.
No, don't put it on the list. We got to do it today. So let's not.
Believe Nader.
I just want Beryl to stay on my case. Beryl, the pharmacist. Okay. Others read or taught the machlokes as follows. Izim yoitzois tzororos liyabesh avaloy lechol. Said like this: goats can go out to dry the milk, but not to collect it. Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira amru, but then Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira added to the matter and said like this: Kach halacha. In essence, this should be the halacha. And Beryl, this is why we have to read to the end of the Gemara, because there's more stuff to take into consideration than just Rav and Shmuel. In essence, we should follow what was the expressed opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and the expressed opinion of Rav. Said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Mi mepis ezel yabish ve'ezel lecholov. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira asks Alan's question: who's going to know, and how do we know if the reason is to dry the milk, or if the reason is to conserve the milk. Let's read Rashi. Where do we get the word mapis? Israelis. Dr. Hammer, do you know what the pious is?
The what?
Pious.
Yeah. The raffle, the
pious.
lottery that supports. Yeah.
So a pious.
Mefal HaPayis.
The pious is a raffle.
Right.
At the time of the Beis Hamikdash, there was a raffle of sorts, a hagrala to decide which kohen would do certain avodas when they were in service. This is relevant for our dear Kohen Gadol here. So it makes sense that you had that question. And there was a whole process. And so Rashi says, you know what pious means? Mi matil garo. Umavchin ezul yabesh, the ezul chalav. Who's able to do some kind of payroll or other kind of formula to figure out what the reason for the udders being done. The haraya oisam sururois. And if you see the person binding or his goats go around with bound udders, liyabesh lemer. He'll say, and we'll say that it was done to dry and it's permissible. The person's going to end up playing trickery, or at least people aren't going to know because they're going to see someone binding for drying purposes and he's going to think it's okay to collect them. So essentially, it would be acceptable. However, we have this problem. We can't figure out the reason for the binding. Being that there is confusion. Hold on. No, one second. Being that we cannot figure out the real reason. No, hold on, maybe. Soon, ice cream soon. Being that we can't figure out what's really the agenda, we don't really know what people are thinking, and people don't really know what's going on. Because there's room for confusion. Both are prohibited. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said, there sometimes can be the real truth, and then there's the practical truth, or the practical way we got to behave. So theoretically, you should only be restricted if it's the chalaf. Practically, because it was hard to distinguish, we're going to say to refrain from any, not that you can't bind their udders, you just can't let them go into the public domain. So you want to go back to the couch? Soon it's coming, ice cream. Sorry, folks, our co-presenter is soon it's coming, ice cream. Soon. Watch. Amar Shmuel commented based on the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Alternatively, it was preserved as a statement or teaching from Rabbi Yehuda, quoting Shmuel. Halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. We must ultimately embrace the position of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that you should not bind the udder. So what's the difference? Practically, there's no difference, for the most part anyways, but there's a small difference. Hypothetically, we should follow Rabbi Yehuda of the Mishnah who's more lenient. Because we can't figure it out, so Yehuda ben Beseira says to not distinguish, and we paskin like him. That's what Shmuel says. So the bottom line of Shmuel's opinion is the same.
So he could have said it.
There's different. Hold on. There are different ways he could have expressed this teaching. The thought process may have been different, but the bottom line remains the same. Shmuel says, don't let your goats with bound udders walk around in the public domain on Shabbos. That is the bottom line. How did he get there? Well, we have different recordings, we have different traditions of how this thought process developed. Either he's paskening like Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah, who's very machmir, or he's technically or theoretically would paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, who's more lenient, but he also has to have the added note of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, which is we can't differentiate, or I should say we have the added note of Rabbi Allen, our pharmacist, that it's hard to differentiate, and therefore the Maisa, you should be machmir. Theoretically, we follow Rabbi Yehuda. In actuality, we need to be machmir. And that's the third way that our debate is recorded. And then we have one last comment. Ki asa Ravin and Rebel. This is going to make things even more confusing. Ki asa Ravin. When Ravin arrived from Israel to Bavel, he brought us the position of the great Rabbi Yochanan. He said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, you know what to do? Can your goats be bound? Can their udders be bound? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, halacha ketana kama. We follow the first opinion. What does the Tana Kama say? Anybody recall? When I showed the Mishnah, I showed you the three opinions in the Mishnah. What does the Tana Kama say? Ha'izim, yoitzais, serurais. The Tana Kama says, let your goats be bound, gesonter hate. I don't care why, it's quite all right. Rashi tells us the same thing. The masnisin, the shari v'tarvayu, whether it's for the milk, whether it's for the drying, it's permitted on Shabbos. So now, Rebel, hold on 1 second. Now, Rebel, we're really with a conundrum. Why are we with a conundrum? Because initially we thought, oh, the Gemara just left us with a machlekes Rav and Shmuel. Now we realize that there's even more going on here. Even more opinions. Let's see if Safaria will make my job easy. I think they do. And we're going to peek first at the Shulchan Aruch. Nechama, where are you getting these things? All right, let's take a peek. Again, we're on the right-hand side. We're reading an excerpt from the Shulchan Aruch. This is Siman Shin Hey 305. This is Seif Vav or 6. Elim Yotzim Levur. This should look familiar to us because it's what we discussed in the Mishnah. The Shulchan Aruch is now going to provide for us some of the definitions, and we're going to see which position the Shulchan Aruch embraces. Rebbe, let's look out for what he has to say about the binding of the udders. Elim Yotzim Levuvim. You're allowed to let your rams go out Levuvim. What was Levuvim? Well, we have three opinions. Maybe it was the legs tied together. Maybe it was an armor, or the third opinion was that they were tying up the male rams to not be able to mount the females. Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch from Yosef Karo says, this is the leather place to prevent the rams from mounting the females. That's allowed to be on Shabbos. The female sheep, yoitzos, shechuzais. They're allowed to go out shechuzais. What's shechuzais? The tails were tied up to promote breeding. Yoitzos kivunais. They're also allowed to go out kivunais. What's kivunais? This we studied today. You're also allowed to tie up their fur, not fur, their wool. Keep it very clean and pure. Bil'izim, goats. She goats, as our Rabbi Steinsaltz says, seroros. They could be bound. They were tied around the udders. When? Sorry, when is it permitted? Only when their udders are tied in a way to cause their udders to dry up. To no longer give forth milk. Why is that permitted? Mehadek shapir. It's really well affixed. It's not going to fall off. If it's only tied in a way to catch the milk. We don't want the milk to fall to the ground. It's prohibited. It's not strongly attached. So very interesting. The Shulchan Aruch paskins in a way that sounds like he's simply recounting the opinion, the way we understand it, of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, with a simple differentiation between how well it's attached and if it's going to fall off.
I thought you weren't supposed to tie on Shabbos.
You're not, but maybe it's tied before Shabbos. Right?
So what's the difference? What has it got to do with Shabbos? I mean,
because on Shabbos, you're not allowed to let your animals go out to the public domain in this state because they might fall off and then you'll carry it, right?
Okay.
Again, the real issue here is carrying or a burden. When is that the issue? If it's in the public domain. So when is it an issue? When it's not properly affixed. Or, no nechama, not for you. Or if it's considered a burden that's not for the essential well-being of the animal. Let's look for a moment. I'm going to peruse the commentaries on the. Oh, but just for a moment, let's go back. But Beryl, what did I say? When there's a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, who do we paskin like?
Rav.
So in monetary matters, we follow Shmuel. But in Isser v'Heter, kosher, Shabbos, purity, we would follow Rav. Which opinion? If this comes down to a machlokes Rav and Shmuel, who are we paskening like? Who are we following, Rav or Shmuel? Following Rav. Rav is the one who says that you're allowed to let your animal go out bound if it's for drawing out the milk. All right, this we already said. Interesting. So the Mishnah Brewer is quoting, I'm not sure from an earlier source, but he says like this. The milk, if it's there for the milk, it's prohibited, but only because it's not properly affixed. The inference is that if not for that issue, it would be permissible. Why isn't it considered a burden? He said it's considered like a garment. And even though ultimately it prevents the milk, it's a garment. Just like when we keep the wool clean, it's considered like a garment. And that's what he explains. All right. Anyway, so there we have it. Lamaisa, it looks like the Shulchan Aruch is clearly paskening like the like Rav. Now let's go back. Halacha. Sorry, doctor, go ahead.
So this sort of refers back to Bernie's thing, but you just mentioned for business items, we follow Shmuel, and for kashrut, we follow Rav, or whatever.
Right.
Okay. Now, the question is, today, okay?
Yeah.
So you move into a community and you join a shul, join the Chabad shul, okay? But sometimes you go to another shul. And now you have a shaila, okay? And you ask the shaila about your mezuzahs to your rabbi of the shul that you really go to, the Chabad shul, and whatever with the mezuzahs. Now your wife has a question about, I don't know, about kashrut, about a kashering something, whatever. And your neighbor is there, and your neighbor says, on kashering, go to this other rabbi in the community because he's making, in other words, I know that you could do it this way, whatever, before you asked anyone. And I think you should go, okay. So the question is, when you say on business items, they went to this one, on kashrut, they went to that one.
No, okay, you're asking a good question.
Is there my understanding in general, okay, it's not like you're not supposed to shop. In other words, I want to know if this kosher. I asked one rabbi that I have confidence in.
You can't go shopping for a judge.
Can't go.
Let me clarify. You're asking a very good question. You're asking who says that we shop around and pick and choose in Rav and Shmuel. So I want to clarify what it means.
Right.
In the days of Rav and Shmuel, the students of Rav follow Rav and the students of Shmuel follow Shmuel. But even in the days of Rav, it's brought in the Gemara that each one had their strength and their specialty. The students have to follow their teachers. But now comes the Gemara and is providing us these opinions in a way that, in somewhat of an organized way, to assist us in understanding what the ultimate halakhic position should be. So now there are formulas presented not because we're picking and choosing, but because each one had a greater prowess, if you will, and acceptance in one area for determining halakha across the board. So it's not that we're picking, we like his opinion, No, Rav was renowned for a strength in this matter, and therefore we're going to prefer or put a higher priority on his opinion when taking all things into account. But it's not that we're picking and choosing. And for the same reason, today, it's really ideal. It's a complicated subject, and I certainly don't want to indicate that I'm going to give you all the clarity. It's a big discussion. Who do you paskin? And what is minhag? And the reason why it's a big deal is because once upon a time, Kihila was very well defined. If you lived in Hamburg, you followed the minhagim of Hamburg, and that's where you lived. And if you moved to another Kihila, so now you had a Shaila. You have to accept the societal norms of your community. Maybe you hold on to some of the chumras, but it was much more simple. Today, what is a Kihila? Today, in one community, in one block in Teaneck, you could have, I don't know, 6 shuls. In Hallandale, on one street, you can have 3 shuls or 4 shuls. And so there's more diversity. And so the definition of community it becomes a little more complex. And it's an issue, not an issue in a bad way, but it's something that needs to be contended with when it comes to figuring out what your halachic opinion should be. And for that reason, people really should have one posek, one person that they're going to turn to for halachic opinions. Now, the advantage of doing that is for exactly the reason that you're saying, because then you're not going to find yourself picking and choosing. Because if you're picking a rabbi based on his reputation for having a certain opinion, well, then you're not asking his opinion at all. You're just asking for yourself how you like to go. And so for that reason, it's really preferred that a person should have a single posek. Now, it's not always possible. Let's say I have a rabbi that I consulted, but sometimes he's not available. If it's an urgent matter, I'll call another posek. And that's okay. But broadly speaking, for general matters, one should stick to a single place. Now, I'm not a posek. I'm more of a facilitator. I'm a rabbi, but I don't my specialty isn't giving halachic opinions, certainly not on complex matters. But I advise many people to reach out to me about easy issues that I have an opinion that's based on the guidance of my rabbanim. I will tell the person, listen, you can ask me my opinion. My advice, don't ask me. Go back to the person you always talk to. And that is the best thing you could do for your Yiddishkeit. Maybe some of you have experienced me giving you that answer yourselves. Sometimes push comes to shove, they don't have someone, so then obviously I'm happy to give guidance. But this happens in particular when guests call from up north and they want to know different hotel kind of Shabbos and Shabbos kind of Shabbos. I tell them, listen, speak to your posek. First of all, it's not necessarily to your benefit for you to ask me. But more than that, you got to be consistent. You got to stick to your posek. And you don't want to have, because sometimes a kula could bring to a chumrah could bring to a kula. A position that in the moment is strict could have applications that create greater latitude in another circumstance, and vice versa. And therefore, Dr. Hammer, I should say, Beryl the doctor, your comment is well taken, and I'm glad you asked it so we can clarify. It's not that we're picking and choosing because we like what they say, it's that there's certain opinions in the Gemara that have precedent or greater weight when taking the totality of the Gemara into account. I hope that clarified the question. I'm glad you asked it. Beryl the farmer, the pharmacist, go ahead.
No. Bernie, I think your question becomes more interesting if you upgrade from wherever you were to a Chabad area. What do you undo?
Undo?
Rabbi, this is Mark.
That's Mark.
Hi, this sometimes actually happens here a lot in my neighborhood because in the situation, most people go to 2 different shuls.
Yes.
It's okay. And this happens a lot where they'd ask the rabbi a halachic question and they get 2 different answers.
Well, they shouldn't be. They certainly should not be doing that because once you get a psak, you're bound to that opinion. Generally speaking.
Okay.
I'm not criticizing. I'm just adding.
So I'm curious. You're right. You should just go to one person who you respect and feels he has the knowledge to ask this. But I apologize.
No, this is it. Oh,
no, but the same. Let me justify his question because if I may, Mark, let's assume you don't.
Hey, Mark's internet just crashed, so we lost him.
Oh, okay, but I think the issue is Mark doesn't go. Okay, he goes to his rabbi. His rabbi says this is what you should do to make your house Pesach dik on the countertop.
It's a good
neighbor says I belong to the other shul, equally orthodox shul. My rabbi says you just pour hot water, you don't have to cover it.
Right.
Okay, that's an example of. So now what do? You're saying you follow your rabbi. You belong to that community, but it's difficult when it's a community where half and half, and it's not.
After it's even more complicated when you're hosting your children for Pesach, and one girl went to this seminary and she still talks to her rabbi from there, and the son went to yeshiva and she talks to his Rosh Yeshiva, and you speak to your Rav, and then you have three opinions. Hopefully,
this is Mark. I apologize.
Right.
Okay, so I missed the part, but this happens continuously, where two rabbis paskin separately, and a lot of these people, believe it or not, go to a third person.
You have that situation.
What?
here,
You have that situation 10 times a day by which hechsher you approve of when you go to buy your kosher food.
Let me just sign off and we'll continue the conversation, but I'm just going to stop the recording in a moment. So again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Again, we're mentioning.
Rabbi, you could.
Hold on, no, I'm just shutting off.
Leave us alone here. We're having fun.
No, I'm saying stay on. We're just going to shut off the recording. I don't want people. We'll keep it focused for the recording. But the bottom line is we're going to mention a refuah shlema for Yeshua Nassim ben Shena Toiba. Refuah shlema, the procedure should be effective to the maximum, and to his brother and to all Klal Yisrael should only be good news. And I want to thank everyone for joining us on this auspicious day, Thursday. I hope you'll join us tomorrow, Friday, for some more Gemara. Thank you all. All I'm doing is